While certainly not exclusive to the Moriae region, there are a few genetic predispositions I've been able to track back to the Gilded Coast. The houndanow, layuru, chronicine, and possessed weapons all came from the western edge of the continent. Some became legendary heroes, others dastardly villains. How many survived the destruction of Moriae isn't a settled matter, though it's clear none were strong enough to prevent it. Hey everyone, it's Homebrew time. Today we're doing background stuff, lineages, and feats. I know you've all wanted to see my feats for a long time. For the text version of these, check out the Patreon at the $5 tier. That'll get you all the Homebrew, including a whole new class and a subclass for every existing class. You'll also get all the building character sheets, over 450 options there. Let's get started with the lineages and the dog. The houndanow are bipedal dogfolk, whose appearance varied more between individuals than any other lineage. Their height, weight, fur, and even facial shape could change drastically depending on their parentage. However, there were a few consistencies between all houndanow. Their wet noses were hypersensitive, allowing them to identify specific smells from long distances and after an extensive amount of time had passed. That meant proficiency in both survival and perception, as well as advantage with either check if smelling was involved. At the bottom of their feet were cushioned pads that allowed them to run faster than the average humanoid, with a base speed of 40 feet instead of 30 feet. Pairing these features with an abnormally strong jaw made them excellent hunters. Their bite would deal 1d6 plus their strength modifier in piercing damage, and after they made a bite attack with their action, they could make a grapple check as a bonus action. Their grapple check had advantage if the first attack was a hit, and they had advantage maintaining it on following turns. However, their biggest commonality was their fierce sense of loyalty. Friendships forged early in a houndanow's life were deeply embedded into their very being. A houndanow's childhood was thus more informative to their adult behavior. It was very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks. An old dog being roughly half a century. While the houndanow reached adulthood quickly, their lives were often quite short. Quite different from the next lineage, the chronicine. Chronicine are physical manifestations of the power of time. Like time, they generally fly under the radar until sneaking up on you with incredible force. Their lifespan was not tied to normal material years. Instead, each chronicine reached adulthood within 20 years, then had 100 years of life they could choose to spend. By using the power of time, a chronicine could decide to make an ability check, saving throw, or attack roll, a natural 20, without having to roll the dice. However, doing so aged them irreversibly by 10 years. That couldn't be slowed with the druid's timeless body ability. When using legend lore to remember the events of Moriae, some of my research partners who were only running a single session noted that the chronicine would never use this ability more than once per one of our sessions. But my more regular collaborators disagreed. Basically, if you're DMing a one-shot with a chronicine, it's fine to limit the power of time to one use. Visually, their skin was varied in color, but desaturated as they aged into a shade of gray. Their height varied from small to medium size, but their features most closely resembled a human, as did their skill diversity, getting access to 2 skills of their choice from the knowledge of the ages. It's widely believed that the chronicine originated in the lost city of Layuru, though there's no evidence the city ever existed, including from the nigh-immortal chronicine we have record of. That doesn't seem to make sense. It is clear that another race emerged from the Lakian Waste, though, the layuru. The layuru evolved in a harsh desert. Their harsh exoskeletons formed a shield to protect them from the constantly blustering debris, but ended up providing protection from weapons as well. This gave them a natural AC of 13 plus their constitution modifier when they weren't wearing armor. Layuru's exoskeleton weren't their only natural combat advantage. They also had their stinger with 10 feet of reach and could make unarmed attacks that dealt 1d4 plus their strength modifier in piercing damage. It didn't matter if they were medium or small size, their tails were extra long. A common tactic was to use their scorpion climb to move up vertical surfaces just out of reach of the creatures they were fighting on the ground. At the 3rd level, they could even stand on ceilings as long as they were strong enough to support their weight. Their most common tactic was just waiting until the sun went down. Layuru had excellent dark vision, up to 60 feet, seeing in dim light like bright light and darkness like dim light. So standard dark vision, but they had it. And now for our final lineage, the possessed weapon. Stories vary on the origins of the possessed weapon. Some believe they came into being after an inordinate amount of blood was spilled on a regular weapon. Others believe they were the result of a soul being bound to the weapon that slayed it. Whatever narrative origin a possessed weapon had, they carried similar characteristics. First, possessed weapons were immortal, as long as they were properly maintained. They could exist unawakened in ruins for an unlimited amount of time, though forces like abrasion and rust generally degraded them after a few hundred years. The spirit that possessed the weapon could tangibly manifest itself. Since this manifestation was the result of the soul's energy, when it was hit with physical damage, the soul took damage, as any other creature would. The weapons they possessed varied, but whatever form their soul weapon took, the spirit form, which would carry it, had proficiency with it, was magical in terms of overcoming resistances, and gained +1 to attack and damage rolls. These souls always knew where their weapon was. If it was ever more than 60 feet away from them, it would instantly appear in their hand. They could retreat into the weapon, or rather their manifestation could retreat into themselves. With a violent soul, they used their action to disappear into the weapon, weapon, which falls to the ground. Any attack against the weapon deals damage to the soul. Other creatures proficient with the weapon could use it, and the weapon would decide whether it gives the creature advantage or disadvantage on their attack rolls. Every time the weapon dealt damage while the soul was inside, the soul takes 1d4 force damage that couldn't be resisted in any way. However, if an attack with the weapon killed another creature while the soul was inside, the soul heals an amount equal to the damage it dealt to the creature times their proficiency bonus. Keep in mind, it was only the damage dealt to the creature. If it's 1d12 plus 15 on the die, but the creature only had 1 HP, that's 1 HP. Hopefully one of these lineages has your mind excited, but maybe you're only excited by my feats, in which case, I've got some choice picks for you. The Arcane armament feat was popular among the Fate bards, who preferred to throw their weapons instead of using a ranged weapon. It required the user to have the ability to cast one spell and proficiency with one martial weapon. The user forged a connection with their weapon, making it magical in terms of overcoming resistances, and they could conjure the weapon back to their hand as a free action. Even better, they could draw out the weapon's magical potential, adding a d4 of force damage to its attacks for the next minute. It required a bonus action and only worked once per long rest. Basically, they could use it if they ever needed to shift into maximum overdrive. It's a shame that the dense feat was almost lost in Moriae, as it allowed a combination that I think is just fantastic. Small fighter, big weapon. It was only for small-sized creatures who have proficiency with martial weapons, but gave them +1 to their strength or constitution score. It also allowed them to wield a heavy weapon without disadvantage. Being built like a little teapot gave them advantage on saving throws against spells and effects that would move them, as well as athletics checks to avoid being grappled. Worth noting, getting advantage on this also helped them reduce damage against certain spells, like Thunderwave. Since it's the same saving throw that would stop them from being pushed, it is also the one that determines how much damage they would take. That allowed them some flexibility, though not as much as our next feat. The Gelatinous disciples weren't the only ones learning from the oozes. Adventurers who knew at least one spell could learn the ways of the slime, gaining +1 to their intelligence, wisdom, or charisma modifier, as well as the ability to cast the alter self spell once per long rest for free, and with spell slots later if they had available slots. It gets even more flexible when they could incorporate a first level spell from the abjuration or transmutation lists as well. That's Alarm, Create or Destroy Water, Expeditious Retreat, Featherfall, Goodberry, Jump, Long Strider, Mage Armor, Protection from Evil and Good, Sanctuary, Shield, or Shield of Faith. So many good options for so many different classes, and those are just some super rad disciplines, or SRD. It's totally possible there were more options that weren't part of that. Wink, wink. Speaking of bending the rules, the casinos of a sect were rife with creative interpretations of gameplay. Regular swindlers would get +1 to their dexterity or charisma. Because they were almost always professional gamers, they could pull off some pro gamer moves, with proficiency in a gaming set of their choice. While playing the game, they had advantage on deception, performance, and sleight of hand checks if they were trying to skirt the rules. Gamers with expertise who took this feat often took the casino on a run, and subsequently went on the run themselves after a draconic warlock hopped on their tail. So, it's a shorter video, but that's okay, because it means I'll have more time to start writing the adventures I plan on playtesting on Patreon. To see when those slots become open, why don't you join the Patreon? And if you want to talk to me about the homebrew, I stream on Twitch all the time. Come hop in a stream and pick my brain. And to watch me play some games, sub to Tulok and Mango for more Tulok fun.